How
Thank you very much, Alistair. I always do this when I come to Thicket. I know Yapi and I are the two people who attended the first Valley Bushveld Symposium in Thomas Baines, I think it was. Yeah. Have I missed anybody? I suppose the grey hairs are a bit of a giveaway. But yes, I'm also very much dyed in the wool of, is one allowed to say that, of Thicket. My father grew up in the Baviaanskloof. My mother grew up in the Longkloof. So it's been a long history and a wonderful life journey. I'm not generally a person, those of you who know me, for cutesy titles, so I'm going to blame Alistair for making me go this low. But it's all in the cause of conservation. What can we learn from mosaics? With a little bit of real thicket, solid thicket is the right word, thrown in. What can we learn in terms of how small a patch of thicket remains viable? I'm using the term bush clumps. I'm just reminding you as the thicket patches in mosaics. This is a slide of Fragmentation 101. Ecosystem effects of fragmentation. There's a few more in the sort of general teaching slide that you would put up for this, but these three I thought were components we could look at and see if we can get information from this type of thing. The first thing is that the patch volume, edge effects, and then distances, which of course has implication in fragments for corridors that are necessary. So if we start with patch volume, the traditional fragmentation, ecology, conservation component says that it's better to be bigger rather than smaller, and that of course means there's a size that is big enough, and there are sizes that are probably too small. So I combined 3 Calcrete Borntveld data sets. Addo is in the red, Grassridge in the green, and Shamwari in the orange. And I must admit that I did do a little bit of a no-no. There is one monster Addo bush clump that I didn't include in this. It sits up there in the ceiling, up there somewhere. And it is surrounded completely by calcrete. I don't know if it has a dough line underneath it. It's an amazing bush clump, but I left it out because I'd like you to see the rest of the data. So if you look at this is a typical species area curve, and I've taken this from work that Shandon Carvalho and Justin Watson did with me some years back, where we used this by log transforming the 2 axes so that we can determine that these bush clumps are de novo. They formed there, they're not thicket remnants left behind after anything. So that was what the purpose of this is, and I've just stuck it together because I think this is perhaps the most important of the graphs. You'll notice that at all 3 sites, we have a fairly similar initial increase as the size of the bush clump increases. Addo's a little bit variable. You can see some well above the line, even this one. But nonetheless, you can then determine what the sort of number of species one can conserve in a bush clump. And if you do an average of the sort of post-asymptotic species richness, excluding that one monster, we end up with 26 species per bush clump, and we can achieve that roughly at about 150 square meters to 200 square meters. I lay in my bed and I looked up the passage and realized that this is twice the size of my little house. I have a 2-bedroom house. So if you just have a mental picture of the airspace you live in, it's about, size of a largish house, if you like. And in that, we, by and large, with few exceptions, have the full biodiversity or species richness on offer. I also just want to point out that this might very well apply to other mosaics. This is Betsy Mayer Mill's PhD of 2014. These were her study sites. Her objective was to compare these calcrete sites in the yellow dots with an assortment of other sites with other matrix elements. Groendal was the Fynbos Thicket site, and then you can see the list. You'll notice that some of them are obviously not there, but it is at least across the bulk of the biome. So looking at what she found in terms of bush clump sizes, you'll notice that there's really not much difference between the different sites in terms of bush clump sizes. So this is just the number of species in the bush clumps, and you can see that they all sort of the same. So we're looking, and of course she would have standardized it on the over 30 square meter bush clumps, and we end up across the landscape with roughly the same sort of species number. This is a little bit less than the 26, as you can see, because of course some of her bush clumps would have been a little bit smaller than the size from some of them will have been a little bit smaller. So a few of her bush clumps would have been on this size, on this side of the graph, which would make it a little bit less. But the important point is we can happily say that they're all roughly, the bush clumps deliver that sort of rough number of species. The other issue that we have is relative to edge effects. If you have an ecosystem like the one on the left that has a hard boundary and copes with a hard boundary, in other words, you walk to the edge and there's the thicket starts, as opposed to you gradually, the edge gets degraded or the edge gets different to the center. And thicket is perhaps kind to us in terms of edge effects. Shandon Covello and I did some work also in all three sites in terms of thicket and thicket edges. We standardized on a 30 square meter plot. The thicket edge was done as a 5x6 plot, with the 6 being so it's basically 5 meters into the thicket was called the edge. And I think everybody will agree that there's no significant difference there. Notice also the number, the species richness, a little bit higher than the bush clumps. We did this at Addo, Shamwari, and Grassroots, the same 3 sites. So there's reasonably good evidence that there's not much, if any, edge effect in thicket. This is the same data for the same plots, and you'll notice that I circled the two points that fall outside the ordination domain. The green is thicket. So this is thicket proper. The pale green is thicket edge. There's only one of the points that's outside of the domain of thicket, so that's really minimal, and the same applies to bush clumps. I haven't quite done as many bush clump edges. It's actually quite difficult. And there was only one that, and I mean, that's hardly outside. So we don't have a significant edge effect. And then the last component would be to look at distance. The further away you get from each other, does it get worse? And that we measured by doing a transect from the thicket into the Bontveld bush clump. One would be close, another one. We tried to standardize on the sizes, and we did 5 bush clumps going, so there's another 2 to the left. The bush clumps we chose to be about 30 square meters so that it would match and there wouldn't be a size difference. And the pale ones in the front are the ones that are far away from each other. The ones at the back that are darker are close by. And once again, there's obviously the bush clump thicket difference, but both in the bush clumps and in the thicket, it appears that the distance doesn't matter. Bird dispersed mostly, of course, as you can imagine, which they're quite capable of moving across these landscapes. So, is 150 square meters of a bush clump worth conserving? I say absolutely, definitely. And what I'd like to ask you is, if it's a solid thicket fragment, is it worth conserving? Thank you.